You know, this will be the fourth time I'm telling this story. And normally when I do, I pretty much just show up, put, my hands over my face, getting a collective sigh, still, not knowing if this is a good idea or not. Even though, again, I have already told it 3 other times in the past. And on top of that, I feel that with each passing year, things do change, or I wind up saying things differently than I did in the past. Because, that's what happens with the passage of time. That's just how it works. But, regardless of how I'm feeling, and regardless of what's happened from last year to now, I always tell this story on this day. And I like to believe that I'm a man of conviction. So, like it or not, ready or not, here I go. Now, it's no secret that in the past, I have mentioned that once upon a time, I did contemplate suicide. However, and I'll get more onto that in tomorrow's video. However, it wasn't until 2021 that I started telling this story, because I feel that it really tells, the complete, narrative outright, today, tomorrow, and then Monday, and then on literally actually I think it might be the 20th that I'll be doing that. Yeah, the 20th and the 21st. So that's 5 really important videos I need to do. And the first one is basically the story of, what actually is wrong with me and why did I contemplate suicide all those years ago. I suppose there's no better place to start than at the beginning. I'm a little kid, so I don't really know what is going on. All I know is that, my parents, took me to Rochester to get some testing done. Now, those of you who are already astute know what it means when you send a child to get tested in Rochester. But if you don't, bear with me, I'll explain in a minute. For years and years and years, no one really ever told me what happened or what the what the results were. My parents knew, but they never really shared it with me. Frankly, I just lived life day to day, just being, a normal kid. Then fast forward to 7th grade, which, yeah, I know, middle school kids, they can be mean, and trust me, they are. It got to the point where I said that I'm going to kill you to these guys who were, making fun of me. Now, this was in 2003, several years removed from the Columbine incident, and therefore virtually every school in the country had, a no tolerance policy. So, needless to say, after I said I was going to kill you to those kids, they snitched on me, and, then I got in trouble. To be fair, yeah, I probably could have lied, but I couldn't lie. I probably could have, but I didn't. So they gave me the punishment of 5 days of in-school suspension. Luckily, though, my mom helped out a lot, and, it was reduced down to 4 days. Which is still bad, but, in-school suspension at any capacity is bad, but I guess 4 days is the best, 5. And then came what happened after that. See, the higher-ups at Horseheads, I don't really know specifically who, asked my mom if there was anything wrong with me. And then that's when she said, well, see, I need to finish that because, you already can figure out what happened there. So, needless to say, I was put in special ed due to the fact that at the time, I'll explain more in a minute, I'll explain more later, I was on the spectrum. And from halfway through my 7th grade year to halfway through my junior year, I was affiliated with special ed. Actually, between for the summers after 7th grade and the summer after 8th grade, if you couldn't tell, I really don't. This is actually how dumb this was. I was in something called Summer Science Institute, where you got to take your earth science course that you would take in high school early, but that was from 8 o'clock in the morning to 11, then you go out. But because I and several other kids in special ed were taking that course, we had to stay there for another X number of hours because group sessions. And that was actually what it was like in 7th and 8th grade. Actually, even to my junior year, they had group sessions, especially during lunch, if that makes sense. And needless to say, I hated every second of it. I did. No one was ever going to take me seriously being in that room. No girl was ever going to want to go out with me for pretty obvious reasons. So I came to the conclusion that, I'm going to graduate Horsehead someday. I'll just, wait out however many years it takes for people to forget, and then things should be back to normal. And this is a secret that I'll take to my grave. And for a long time, it really was going to be a secret I would take to my grave. That was the plan until my sophomore year of high school. Actually, before I get into that, I said that middle school can be a really cruel time. I'd be remiss if I didn't point out that it was my 8th grade year where I genuinely experienced my very first heartbreak. Basically, there was this one girl that liked me, and I only just started. I always knew I would like girls, but I didn't really, be open about the fact I liked girls until, late 7th grade, early 8th grade year. So, let me adjust my legs here. And there was one girl that liked me, but when she found out that I was in special ed, she wound up choosing, the other guy over me. I mean, listen, I know that, middle school can be a very cruel time. I mean, even now people have to deal with, how mean middle school kids are. But again, as bad as that was, remember, at one point I did say, I'll graduate from here, just stay in seclusion. Maybe people will forget, and I'll just take the secret to my grave. And then came what happened my sophomore year of high school. It's always this part, I always get kind of emotional. So, it was my sophomore year, and I was taking, health class. And first of all, contrary to popular belief, health class isn't all about learning about the male and female anatomy. You actually have to learn about actual health, including mental health. And we're watching the movie I Am Sam. That was something that we had to do for class. And if you don't know that movie, it stars Sean Penn, who plays, a disabled man, very much autistic. And, the movie starts out he has relations with this one woman who has a kid, but then, after the kid is born, she walks away completely out of the picture. So now Sean Penn's character, Sam, is raising this little girl by himself. And the movie does a sell, and the movie, shows that, life is, he's doing a good job taking care of the kid, he's raising the kid, teaching the kid, right and wrong. Like, for all intents and purposes, Sam is being a good father to this kid. He is. But then came, like, one scene in the movie where, like, the kid was invited to a birthday party and all the parents were there. And I think, like, if I remember the movie correctly, like, I think what Sam does is, like, do the equivalent of giving a kid, like, an attaboy, and then, like, all the parents freak out, and they're saying, why does he even have a kid? He shouldn't be allowed to raise a kid on his own, And, there's, like, a giant court case, saying that, maybe Sam should be allowed to take care of this kid. They want to take the kid away from him. And as I'm watching this, I'm thinking, oh my God, there's no escape from this. This being on the spectrum thing is gonna follow me everywhere I go. And, if I have a kid, they may, I should say that as a 35-year-old man now, I know that I have a support system. Say for the sake of argument, something like that happens to me, I have family who would help me, I have friends who would help me, someone would be there to help me get past this rather emotional and difficult time, if that ever happens. I know that now. I didn't know that at age 16, though. So, I'm thinking all kinds of crazy stuff. And as the next couple of years went on, it got, worse. I mean, I mentioned, like, if I'm on the spectrum and I have a kid, are they going to take my kid away from me? And keep in mind, this was 2006. A couple of years later, we would have Barack Obama running for president. And if anyone even remembers that time, you remember how the media was, like, going nuts about, the fact that Barack Obama was the first African American running for president and would later become president. Like, the media was making a big deal about that. A few decades prior to that, they made a big deal about JFK being Catholic, And I'm thinking, at this time, I'm on the spectrum. Like, what's the media going to do about me? I mean, whether it's for a religious reason, a racial reason, a mental health reason, the people from the media really are cut by the same cloth. They'll find just about anything to talk about and very much potentially put it in a negative light. I mean, more often than not you get stuff that's positive, but I mean, come on. This would be one instance where that wouldn't be the case. And it was at that moment there, I thought, this isn't worth living. This can't be a way to live. So that's ultimately why I came to the conclusion that, maybe the world would be better off without me. And for a long time, that really is how I felt. I mean, I did know that. Here's the thing. In my heart, I knew, but I didn't want to believe it. I mean, I should have realized how stupid some of it was. And when I mentioned earlier how, back in 8th grade, a girl chose the other guy over me because I was, in special ed. I'll actually never forget what happened that day, because earlier that day, I'm in lunch with several other kids in this room who are in special ed with me. And one kid in particular was being, acting dumb. And so I wound up calling him a retard. He then snitched on me, and I got pulled out of my 8th grade English class. the day I was going to tell this girl how I felt. And by extension, she then knew I was in special ed, and therefore, that's when she chose the other guy over me. There are so many things wrong about that moment that still bother me even now. Like, yes, I shouldn't have called him anything, much less a retard. But in context, I was actually terrified of swearing once upon a time. And for as bad a word as retard is, that's not a swear word. I mean, there are so many worse things I actually could have said but didn't because, again, I was terrified of swearing. Think about it. There are 7 words you're not allowed to say on television and radio. And, 6 of them are worse than retard, for sure. Not to mention, do I even need to mention that there's a certain word that begins with a certain letter of the alphabet that a white guy should absolutely never say? Like, the point is, there's worse things you could say to anyone. And the fact that I got snitched on for that, and the teacher pulled me out of class for that, like, to this day, I'm still mad, like, those teachers for special ed back when I was in the middle school and for the high school. I am. I mean, it's only by the grace of God I haven't seen them since. Which reminds me, I mentioned I was there until halfway through my junior year, and that was because by that point, I'd already established myself as a functioning member of society. Not that I didn't do that before. I was 3-sport varsity athlete. I was in choir. I was in plays. Like, there really was no reason for me to be in that room at all. I'll get to that a little bit later. I've been saying that a lot in this video, haven't I? So, yes. By halfway through my junior year, I was finally out of special ed. I didn't have to deal with it anymore. So, 5 years. When you include those 2 summers I mentioned earlier, that it might as well be 6 years, actually. I say that my senior year at Horseheads was the best year by far, pretty much for this very reason. However, by that point, the damage was already done. I don't think I really could ever say how just demeaning it is to be a senior, a veritable big man on campus. One of the toughest guys in that school, easily a top 3 athlete there. And you have freshmen calling me Rain Man. I never, for the record, I haven't seen that movie, but I know what it's about. So, all it did was just incentivize, and I think it finally came to a head for me, like, for senior prom, when I didn't have a date. And I remember I kept a brave face on the outside, but I remember a couple days after prom, I just broke down and cried thinking how much it sucked, how I didn't have a date, and, if I was never in special ed, maybe things would be a lot different. I mean, again, it's only by the grace of God that I wound up asking, for junior prom, like, the nicest human being probably to have ever existed, to be my date for junior prom. And she said yeah to that, and I like to joke saying I probably used up all the luck I'll ever have in life for that. So, yeah. At this point, you guys are wondering how earlier I mentioned that I would have taken this secret to my grave. What made me change my mind? What, made me finally come out and explain all this. Well, around, 2020, 2021, I was at that point in my life where I'd worked at my family's shop for a good, a long time at that point, since for a good 6 years, and I felt maybe I need to find a different job. And luckily, there are services that can facilitate that sort of thing, which is great. The problem is, though, I would have to come clean about the fact that, I was on the spectrum. But the good thing about this service is, at any point, I can just say, I no longer need the service anymore, and I'd be done with that. Okay. That's fine. Of course, you can't just, get services like this just by saying, hey, I'm disabled, I'm on the spectrum, please help me. It doesn't work that way. There's got to be, some testing involved. There's got to be, you got to actually prove that, okay, you do need help or whatever. So they did run some series of tests, which, funny enough, were a lot like the tests I took back in Rochester, and several times I was in special ed, where, they'd ask me to the best of my ability to explain definitions of words that I would hear. They make me take a couple math questions. They help me recognize, they tell me to recognize, certain patterns and orders of things. They would, show images of people expressing emotion, and I would have to tell them what that emotion is, stuff like that. And throughout this time, I'm talking to the guy who's performing the tests, who actually sadly passed away a couple years ago, God rest his soul. I actually told him about, that I was, on the spectrum, and at one point I did want to contemplate suicide. To which then he said, for what it's worth, I don't think you're autistic. I think you're depressed. Which actually was quite reassuring. Given what had happened to me over all those years, I'd rather be sad than on the spectrum. That's just me. So, in the end, I was actually diagnosed with depression and pragmatic communication disorder. Depression, you can pretty much guess what that is. The latter, on the other hand, basically it's different for a lot of people. For me, I do kind of tend to get angry a little bit easier. I also tend to explain things using my hands a lot. You probably noticed that throughout this video. But neither one of those two things involve being on the spectrum. Which means I never really was which means I wasn't on the spectrum to begin with. And therefore, all those years of the depression, the rejection I would get, the contemplations of suicide, the belief that, my brother was the favorite child. Listen, you wouldn't put listen, just saying, you wouldn't put the favorite kid in special ed. Just saying. All of that was for nothing. And don't get me wrong, when I was first told what's really wrong with me, it really did feel as if a weight was lifted off of my shoulders. I could actually breathe for the first time in my life. But I was 31 years old when I was finally told this. That means 31 years of my life were dedicated to feeling as bad as I was for all that time. Let's say for the sake of argument, I actually lived to be 62 years old. That's half my life dedicated to being depressed, rejected, and all the other things that being on the spectrum came with. So, yeah. It really would be easy for me to say, because Rochester got the diagnosis wrong, that, Rochester's bad, don't go to Rochester, you're an idiot if you take your kid testing in Rochester. That's not true. Listen, there is a reason why people send their kids to Rochester for testing. It's because they've had decades of research, development, and success in dealing with, people who are on the autism spectrum. They have. You really could make the argument that the city of Rochester holds the authority on, autism diagnosis and research. This really is just one of those rare cases where, even the best make a mistake. Granted, I was the result of that mistake, but, stuff like that happens. It does. Before I continue, though, I think it really is necessary to understand just how much where, even after I stopped contemplating suicide, and I'll get more of that till tomorrow, I need to talk about just how bad it really got for me after the fact, emotionally. It was a couple weeks after I graduated from Gettysburg College, and my brother was back in town. He was meeting up with some of his friends from his old high school, Notre Dame. Yeah, I went to Horses. My brother went to Notre Dame. And my brother, because he's cool like that, he offered that I tag along. And we wind up going to this one girl's house, and we actually have a really good time. We're having people are having a few drinks. I mean, I was the designated driver, so I didn't drink. People are having drinks. We're having fun. We're loose, having a good time. And this one girl, who was actually the host of the party, mentioned how for a summer job she's she's watching special ed kids. And I kid you not. And yes, again, she had a few, but hold that thought for a second, because she wound up calling those kids little retards. You're a teacher to these students, and you're calling them that. I don't think I need to address just how wrong that is, but it is wrong. It's absolutely wrong. And everybody started, laughing at that. And because I wanted nothing to do with, being in special ed or on the autism spectrum anymore, I laughed along with them. That was the first time in my life I ever publicly sympathized with my oppressors. Which brings me back to what I was going to talk about before. It would also be really easy for me to say, if you're a special ed teacher, what's wrong with you? You're bad. I pity anyone who lets you anywhere near their kids. You don't know anything about it. You don't know anything about me. Stuff like that. It'd be easier for me to do that. But I really do believe in my heart of hearts that there really are good people out there. And keep in mind, some of what I thought once upon a time is because of the teachers that I had. I wouldn't say they were bad per se, but you can tell that they had that sort of burnt out, like not really caring anymore, fake smile personality. No kidding. A couple of years ago, I actually did look at one of my old yearbooks, and I kid you not, I saw the photo of one of those teachers, and it was like the fakest looking smile I had ever seen, like ever. Like, that's a smile that says, like, you're not caring about what you do, or you don't want to be there anymore. But again, I believe in my heart of heart that there really are good people out there that actually want to, be special education teachers. So much so that they dedicated X number of years of their lives for schooling, education, getting the proper, degrees and documentation, and, they wake up every day to go to a job that they like to do because they enjoy their work, they enjoy the kids they get to interact with, and because of that, they're able to make a living, they're able to, pay their bills, put food on the table to feed their families. If any of them have kids, they probably use what they get paid to pay for their kids' college fund, if their kids want to go to college, put a roof over their heads. Like, that is how they make a living. And for me to take that away from them would make me no better than the oppressors that I once sympathized with. Which brings me to, me as a whole. I mean, yes, it is true that I really have depression and pragmatic communication disorder. And believe me, more often than not, I wanted nothing to do to associate with anyone being on the spectrum. So much so that if ever I heard anyone talk about knowing someone who's on the spectrum or having a kid who was on the spectrum, I tuned out the conversation, didn't want anything to do with it. So believe me when I tell you, like, when I sympathized with my oppressors once upon a time, I really did do that. And believe me, when I do finally go, that's going to be one of many things I'll have to answer for. However, over time, that feeling's kind of wavered. And I especially want to give a major shout out to one of my favorite comedians of all time, Ron Funches, who actually does have a son who is on the spectrum. And I remember watching his stand-up special, Giggle Fit, which if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend you watch. It's very funny. He talks about how he does have a son who's on the spectrum. And if you take one thing away from that, or what I'm about to say right now, at least let me say this. If you know someone or are taking care of someone or responsible for someone who is on the spectrum, then congratulations. You've been chosen to take care of a beautiful soul. I never heard anything like that back in the day, back when I was in special ed. And honestly, knowing me, if I had heard, I would have completely disregarded it. But it still would have been nice to hear. So yeah, that's why I contemplated suicide. And part of the reason why I'm still here. As for what made me change my mind about suicide, well, that's something I'll have to get into tomorrow, in tomorrow's video. I suppose this is the part where I could say, if you like what you saw, please subscribe to my YouTube channel, check out, everything else I've talked about and made and stuff like that. But I couldn't possibly end the video without doing what I normally do, which is saying the following. I am beyond humbled that I got to share this story with all of you, my story with all of you. I am forever hopeful that, someone hears this story, hopefully you won't judge me too harshly on it, but also I hope someone hears this story and knows that, there is more to life worth living, and I'll get more of that tomorrow. And again, if it's what Ron Funches said, if you know someone's on the spectrum, congratulations, you get to know a beautiful soul. That's great. That's awesome. It's honestly one of the most beautiful things ever. So I'm hopeful that, someone hears this and, uses that to get through any difficult time they're having. And as always, if you ever need to talk more about it, I'm always going to be here to listen, because that's just what I do. So, in the words of one of the best teachers I ever had at Horseheads, make good choices. Have a nice day.